The widowed millionaire didn't know what to do with his hungry son, but what the nanny did was unexpected. The night fell over Brighton like a heavy cloak, bringing with it a silence the city rarely knew during the day. In the streets of the Bellevue Heights neighborhood, where mansions rose imposingly amidst meticulously planned gardens, the tranquility was almost palpable. Almost. Because inside one of the most luxurious residences in the area, silence was just a distant memory, replaced by a sound that repeated tirelessly, night after night, ever since winter had begun to give way to spring. Caleb Anderson sat in his Italian leather armchair, in his second-floor office, his eyes fixed on the computer screen, but not truly seeing the numbers dancing before him. Financial reports, expansion projections, proposals for new contracts. All that usually absorbed his complete attention now seemed distant, almost irrelevant. The baby's cry pierced the thick walls of the mansion as if they were made of paper, a sharp, persistent wail that seemed endless. 4 months. 120 days since David was born. 120 days since Marianne had left. Caleb closed his eyes for an instant, trying to push away the pain that still pulsed fresh in his chest. Marianne, with her brown eyes always full of life, with her smile that lit up any room. Marianne, who dreamed of being a mother ever since they met, who decorated the baby's room with such affection, choosing every detail with a dedication that moved him. Marianne, who held his hand during contractions, who looked at him with a mixture of fear and hope when they entered the delivery room. He couldn't forget the moment the doctor came out of the operating room, his face grim, his words carefully chosen. Complications, hemorrhage. We did everything we could, the baby is fine. Caleb remembered hearing those words, as if they came from far away, as if he was submerged in icy water. The baby is fine, but Marianne was not. Marianne would never be again. The crying intensified, jolting Caleb from his painful memories. He stood up, ran a hand over his tired face, and walked to the baby's room. The week's nanny, a middle-aged woman with vast experience according to the agency, was beside the crib, rocking David with mechanical movements, her face marked by exhaustion. "I've tried everything, Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice laden with frustration. "I changed his diaper, gave him the bottle, checked his temperature, sang, rocked. He just won't stop crying." Caleb approached the crib and looked at his son. David was too small, thinner than he should be at 4 months. His tiny face was red from the effort of crying, his fists clenched, his body tense. It was as if every fiber of his being was protesting against something no one could identify. "Let me try," Caleb said, extending his arms. The nanny handed the baby over with a barely disguised sigh of relief. When Caleb held his son, he felt the too light weight in his arms, the warm, trembling body. David continued crying, turning his tiny face from side to side, as if searching for something. Caleb began to walk around the room, rocking gently, murmuring words he didn't quite understand himself. "It's okay. Daddy's here. You're safe." But the words sounded empty even to his own ears. How could everything be okay when the baby's mother wasn't there? How could he offer security when he felt completely lost? After 20 minutes of fruitless attempts, Caleb returned David to the nanny. "I'll call the pediatrician again tomorrow," he said, his voice tired. "There must be something we haven't tried yet." My nanny nodded, but Caleb saw the doubt in her eyes. They had already consulted 5 different pediatricians, 2 pediatric gastroenterologists, a neurologist, even an integrative medicine specialist who came from London, especially to assess the case. All had reached the same conclusion. David was physically healthy. Tests showed nothing wrong, mild reflux, nothing to justify that constant crying. Colic, perhaps, but that should have improved over time. The neurologist suggested it could be something emotional, a birth trauma, the absence of the mother. But how do you treat the emotional pain of a 4-month-old baby? Caleb descended the stairs, feeling the weight of each step. The mansion was silent downstairs, only the muffled sound of crying coming from the second floor. He entered the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and stood looking out the window at the illuminated garden. The jabuticaba trees that Marianne loved so much were laden with fruit. She wouldn't live to see them like this. His cell phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from his mother, Mrs. Eleanor. "I need to talk to you tomorrow. It's important, family matter." Caleb sighed. He knew exactly what it meant. His mother had been pressuring him for weeks about David's situation, about the nannies who came and went, about the comments that were starting to circulate in the social circles they frequented. The Anderson family's reputation was being questioned. What would people say? A successful businessman who couldn't take care of his own son. He typed a short reply. "Tomorrow afternoon. My house." He put his phone away and went back to the office. He had an important meeting in the morning with investors, interested in expanding the chain of clinics into the Midlands countryside. He needed to review the numbers, prepare the presentation. But how could he concentrate when his son's crying echoed through the house as a constant reminder of his failure as a father? The hours dragged on. Around 3 in the morning, the crying finally ceased. Caleb silently went upstairs and peeked into the baby's room. David slept restlessly in the crib, his tiny face still marked by tears. The nanny dozed in the armchair beside him, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. Caleb felt a wave of guilt. That woman was exhausted, just like all the others who came before her. How many more would give up before he found a solution? The next morning, Caleb woke up with only 3 hours of sleep. He put on one of his impeccable suits, adjusted his tie in front of the mirror, and tried to ignore the deep, dark circles under his eyes. The meeting with the investors was a success, at least professionally. He presented the numbers with his usual confidence, answered questions with precision, and closed the deal with a firm handshake. But inside, he felt empty. When he returned home in the early afternoon, he found his mother already waiting in the living room. Mrs. Eleanor Anderson was a 65-year-old woman, elegant and impeccably dressed, her grey hair always pulled back in a perfect bun. She had that air of authority that came from decades of hosting social events, chairing charity committees, and keeping the family's image intact. "Caleb," she said, rising to kiss her son's cheek, "you look terrible." "Thanks, Mom," he replied with a tired smile. "Always so delicate." Eleanor didn't smile back. "Sit down. We need to talk seriously." Caleb sat in the armchair opposite his mother, mentally preparing himself for what was to come. "This situation with David cannot continue," Eleanor began, getting straight to the point. "People are talking, Caleb. They say there's something wrong with the child, that you're not able to care for him properly. Yesterday, at Marcia's tea party, 3 people asked me if it was true that you were having a nervous breakdown." Caleb felt irritation rise. "And what did you say?" "I said they were unfounded rumors, of course, but I cannot continue to defend a situation that is clearly out of control. You need professional help, not just for the baby, but for you too." "I've already sought all the professional help available, Mom. 5 pediatricians, specialists from London, even a holistic therapist. No one can explain why David cries so much." Eleanor clasped her hands in her lap, her face grave. "Then perhaps it's time to consider other options. I know a family in London, excellent people who would be willing to care for David temporarily. Just until you recover, reorganize yourself." Caleb felt his blood run cold. "Are you suggesting I abandon my son?" "Don't be dramatic. I'm suggesting you recognize your limitations. You're exhausted, the child is suffering, and the situation is only getting worse. Sometimes true love means recognizing when we cannot do something alone." "No," Caleb said, his voice firm. "David is my son. He's already lost his mother. I won't abandon him too." Eleanor sighed, clearly frustrated. "Then at least hire someone more qualified. These nannies you've been hiring are incompetent. You need someone with pediatric nursing training, perhaps even a live-in nurse." "I've tried that. None of them lasted more than 2 weeks." "Because you're not offering adequate support. You need a complete team. A nurse, an efficient housekeeper, perhaps even a pediatric nutritionist." Caleb ran a hand through his hair, feeling his frustration grow. "Mom, it's not a matter of money or staff. There's something else going on with David, something none of us understand." At that moment, the crying started again upstairs. Eleanor flinched slightly, the discomfort visible on her face. Caleb stood up. "I need to go." "Think about what I said," Eleanor called as he went upstairs, "for everyone's sake." In the baby's room, the nanny was again trying to calm David, without success. Caleb took over, dismissing her to rest. He stood there, pacing back and forth with his son in his arms, feeling despair grow with each passing minute. It was then that he heard a soft knock on the door. Mrs. Lucy, the housekeeper, appeared with a hesitant expression. "Mr. Anderson, the new employee has arrived. The cleaner we hired to replace Joanna." Caleb nodded, distracted. "You can show her what she needs to do. I trust your judgment." Mrs. Lucy left, and Caleb turned his attention back to David. The baby continued crying, his tiny face growing redder. Caleb felt tears burn in his own eyes. "Please," he murmured, "please, tell me what you need." But David couldn't answer. He could only cry. Meanwhile, downstairs, Rosalie Smith entered the Anderson mansion for the first time. She was 26, slender, with brown hair tied in a simple ponytail, and wore clean but clearly old clothes. She carried a worn bag on her shoulder and looked around with a mixture of admiration and discomfort. She had never been in such a luxurious place. Mrs. Lucy, a robust 50-year-old woman with a kind smile, showed her the rooms. The living room with its leather sofas and crystal chandeliers, the dining room with a table that seated 12 people, the modern kitchen with appliances Rosalie had only seen in magazines. Everything was too big, too shiny, too far from the world she knew. "You'll start with the kitchen and the living room," Mrs. Lucy explained. "Tomorrow I'll show you the rest. Mr. Anderson is very particular about cleanliness, but he's fair, pays well and on time." Rosalie nodded, absorbing the information. She was grateful for the job. After months unemployed, living with her mother's help in Snowbrook Dale, this opportunity was a blessing. Even if the bus ride to Bellevue Heights took almost 2 hours. That's when she heard it, a sharp, persistent cry coming from upstairs. Rosalie stopped in the middle of the hallway, her entire body reacting to that sound. It was a baby crying, a desperate cry. "It's Mr. Anderson's baby," Mrs. Lucy explained, noticing Rosalie's reaction. "Poor little thing. He's been crying day and night since he was born. His mother didn't survive childbirth. A tragedy." Rosalie felt something tighten in her chest, an old pain, still fresh. "How old is he?" 4 months, and no one can calm him down. 7 nannies have come through here. The current one is at her limit." Rosalie didn't answer. She stood there listening to that cry that seemed to echo something within her. An emptiness she knew too well, the loss that still bled in her heart. 3 months ago she was 8 months pregnant. 3 months ago she was decorating a simple nursery in her mother's house, washing baby clothes, dreaming of the moment she would hold her son in her arms. 3 months ago she still had hope, but the baby wasn't born. He stopped moving one Sunday morning. At the hospital, they confirmed what she already knew deep down. There were no more heartbeats. They induced labor, and she gave birth to a perfect, silent boy who would never cry, never nurse, never call her mother. Since then, her body continued to produce milk. Doctors said it was normal, that it would pass with time, but it didn't. Every morning she woke up with sore breasts, leaking milk that had no baby to feed. It was nature's cruelty, a constant reminder of what she had lost. "Are you all right?" Mrs. Lucy asked, touching her arm lightly. Rosalie blinked, returning to the present. "Yes, I am. Sorry, it's sad to hear a baby cry like that." "It is," Mrs. Lucy agreed, sighing, "but it's not our concern. Our job is to keep the house clean. Mr. Anderson has professionals taking care of the baby." Rosalie nodded, but she couldn't get that crying out of her head. She started working, cleaning the kitchen with attention to detail, but her thoughts kept returning to the baby upstairs. A baby who had lost his mother, a baby who cried inconsolably, just as she cried at night, in silence, so her mother wouldn't hear. Hours passed. Rosalie worked efficiently, cleaning every surface until it shone. Mrs. Lucy praised her work, said she could come back the next day. Rosalie thanked her, picked up her bag and prepared to leave. But before she left, she looked one last time at the stairs leading to the second floor. The crying continued, weaker now, but still present. A sound that seemed to pierce her soul. While waiting for the bus on the avenue, Rosalie couldn't stop thinking about that motherless baby, about that desperate father, about that house full of luxury but empty of peace, and about her own body that still produced milk for a son who would never nurse. She didn't know it yet, but something had begun that day, an invisible connection, woven by shared pain, by the loss they both carried, a connection that would change everything. The bus arrived, and Rosalie got on, finding a seat near the window. As the city passed outside, illuminated by the lights of the night that was beginning to fall, she closed her eyes and offered a silent prayer, for the baby crying in a mansion in Bellevue Heights, and for the baby who would never cry, who rested in a cemetery in Snowbrook Dale. May both find peace. But peace, she would soon discover, would come in a way no one could predict, in a way that would challenge all rules, all judgments, all expectations, in a way that would be born not of reason, but of the most primitive and true need, the need to love and be loved, the need to fill the void that loss leaves, the need to find, in the midst of pain, a reason to continue. And it would all begin with a simple, forbidden, desperate gesture. A gesture Rosalie didn't yet know she would make, but that her body and heart were already preparing. Because sometimes, life puts us exactly where we need to be, even when we don't understand why. Even when the path seems impossible, even when everything conspires against it. Sometimes destiny weaves its threads in mysterious ways, uniting souls that need each other, creating bonds that no logic can explain, but that no force can undo. And in the mansion in Bellevue Heights, while Caleb finally managed to get David to sleep after hours of crying, he had no idea that the answer to his prayers had just walked out the front door. He had no idea that his son's salvation would come from where he least expected it, from a simple woman marked by pain who carried in her body what David needed most. Not just milk, but love, understanding, the ability to see beyond the crying, beyond the despair, and find there a soul that, like hers, just wanted to be seen, to be embraced, to be loved. Night fell completely over Brighton, bringing with it temporary silence. But it was only the silence before the storm, before the revelations, before the impossible choices, before everything changed. And it would change. Oh, how it would change. The following days dragged on with an exhausting routine that seemed endless. Rosalie arrived at the mansion every morning at 7 o'clock, after a 2-hour commute that included 2 crowded buses and a steep walk along the tree-lined avenue of Bellevue Heights. She brought with her only a simple packed lunch, prepared by her mother, and a reused water bottle. Mrs. Lucy always greeted her with a tired smile and a list of tasks for the day. The cleaning routine was intense. The mansion had 3 floors, 6 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, a living room, a dining room, an office, a library, a huge kitchen, and a utility area that was larger than the house, where Rosalie lived with her mother. But she didn't complain. The work was honest, the pay fair, and Mrs. Lucy treated her with respect, something Rosalie had learned to value after previous experiences in other homes. But there was something that made every day in that mansion particularly difficult. The crying, constant, piercing, desperate. David cried for hours on end, and the sound penetrated the walls, the corridors, reaching wherever Rosalie was working. She tried to concentrate on her tasks, scrubbing the kitchen floor, cleaning the living room windows, organizing the pantry. But her ears always returned to that crying, and her heart tightened every time she heard it. Mrs. Lucy noticed. "You'll get used to it," she said on one of the first days, while they had coffee together in the kitchen during a break. "At first it's difficult, but then you learn not to let it affect you." Rosalie nodded, but she knew it wasn't true, not for her. Every cry from David echoed something deep within her, touched a wound that had not yet healed. Sometimes, when the sound became particularly intense, she had to stop what she was doing and take a deep breath, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. On the 3rd day, while cleaning the 2nd-floor hallway, Rosalie saw the current nanny leaving David's room with a face marked by exhaustion. The woman, whose name was Constance and was about 40, carried an expression of defeat that Rosalie immediately recognized. I can't take it anymore, Constance murmured, more to herself than to Rosalie. 3 sleepless nights. This boy isn't normal. There's something wrong with him. Rosalie felt a wave of indignation. He's just a baby who lost his mother. Constance looked at her with red, tired eyes. You don't understand. I've taken care of dozens of babies, premature, with colic, with reflux, but I've never seen anything like this. It's like he's looking for something no one can give him. The words echoed in Rosalie's mind all day. Looking for something no one can give. Was it true? Or had no one really tried to understand what David needed? That night, when Rosalie got home, she found her mother, Mrs. Alice, preparing dinner in their small but cosy kitchen. The house in Snowbrookdale was simple, with 2 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen and bathroom. The walls needed painting. The floor was worn, but it was home. It was where Rosalie had grown up, where she had dreamed, where she had cried her greatest sorrows. "How was your day?" Alice asked, stirring the beans on the stove. "Tiring," Rosalie replied, sitting at the table. "But it's fine. Mrs. Lucy is kind." Alice looked at her daughter with that maternal gaze that sees beyond words. "And the baby? Still crying a lot?" Rosalie hesitated. "He cries. All the time. The nanny is at her limit." "Poor little thing," Alice sighed. "To lose his mother like that so young, he must miss her." Rosalie didn't answer. She stared at her own hands, feeling the familiar weight in her chest. 3 months. 3 months had passed since she lost her son. 3 months since she held that perfect, silent little body in her arms, since she said goodbye to the dream of being a mother. 3 months, and the pain was still as intense as on the first day. "Are you taking the medicine the doctor prescribed?" Alice asked softly. Rosalie nodded. "I am, but it doesn't help much." Alice approached and placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "It'll pass, my dear. Everything passes with time." But Rosalie wasn't so sure. Some pain seemed permanent, indelibly tattooed on the soul. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Rosalie couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about David, about that desperate crying, about that baby who was looking for something no one could give. And she thought about herself, about her body that continued to produce milk, about her arms that longed to hold a baby, about her heart that desperately needed a purpose. Would it be crazy to think that maybe, just maybe, she could help? The next morning, Rosalie arrived at the mansion and found a chaotic scene. Constance was in the living room with her bags packed, arguing with Mrs. Lucy. Caleb was on the phone, his voice tense, clearly trying to resolve the situation. "I don't care how much you're offering," Constance was saying, her voice firm despite the exhaustion. "I won't stay another day. This job is ruining my health." Caleb hung up the phone and approached. "Please, just a few more days until I find a replacement." "No," Constance was categorical. "I've already informed the agency. They'll send my payment. I'm leaving now." And that's what she did. She picked up her bags and walked out the door without looking back, leaving a heavy silence in the room. Caleb ran a hand over his face, clearly on the verge of a breakdown. Mrs. Lucy looked at him with concern. "Mr. Anderson, I can try to take care of the baby temporarily," she offered, "until you find someone." Caleb shook his head. "You already have too much work, Lucy. I can't ask that." It was then that Rosalie, who was standing in the corner of the room holding cleaning supplies, heard the crying start again upstairs. Her body reacted. Before her mind could process, she put the supplies on the floor and stepped forward. "I can help," the words came out before she could stop them. Everyone looked at her. Caleb frowned. "You?" Rosalie felt her face flush, but she stood firm. "I can stay with him while you look for a nanny, just so he's not alone." Caleb studied her for a moment. "Do you have experience with babies?" "I do," Rosalie half lied. "I've taken care of nephews." She didn't mention that she had never gotten to take care of her own child. Mrs. Lucy intervened. "Rosalie is very responsible, Mr. Anderson, and the baby cannot be left alone." Caleb hesitated, clearly torn. Finally he nodded. "All right, but only temporarily. I'll call the agency now and ask for an urgent replacement." Rosalie went upstairs, her heart pounding. She didn't know exactly what she was doing, but she felt she needed to do something. She couldn't just hear that crying and not try to help. When she entered David's room, she found the baby red from crying so much, his tiny body tense in the crib. She approached slowly, extending her arms. "Hi, little one," she murmured softly. "It's... okay, I'm here." When she picked David up, something extraordinary happened. The baby stopped crying for an instant, as if assessing who this person was. His tiny eyes, still wet with tears, fixed on Rosalie's face, and then, to her surprise, he snuggled against her chest, his tiny body relaxing for the first time in days. Rosalie felt tears burn in her eyes, the weight of the baby in her arms, the warmth of the small body, the characteristic baby smell, everything she thought she would never have. She began to sway gently, murmuring nonsensical words, just letting her voice soothe the little one. David didn't cry again. He stayed there, quiet, breathing softly against Rosalie's chest. She walked to the armchair and sat down, continuing to rock the baby. Minutes passed, half an hour, an hour. David slept peacefully, something that hadn't happened in days. When Caleb came up to check, he found that scene. Rosalie sitting in the armchair, David sleeping peacefully in her arms, an expression of peace on both their faces. He stopped at the door, watching in silence. How was it possible? How had a cleaner without formal training managed what 7 experienced nannies could? Not. Rosalie noticed his presence and looked up. "He's sleeping," she whispered. "I see that," Caleb replied, his voice filled with emotion. "How did you do it?" Rosalie looked at the baby in her arms. "I don't know. I just picked him up and he calmed down." Caleb entered the room and approached. He watched his son sleeping, his tiny face finally relaxed, without signs of tension. He felt something tighten in his chest, gratitude, relief, and a pang of jealousy he didn't expect to feel. "Thank you," he said simply. Rosalie nodded. "I can stay with him until you find someone, if you want." Caleb looked at her, really looked for the first time. He saw a young, slender woman with sad eyes that seemed to carry an invisible weight. He saw hands calloused from hard work, simple but clean clothes, a posture that mixed humility and determination. There was something about her, something he couldn't identify, but that clearly resonated with his son. "I appreciate it," he said. "I'll increase your salary, of course, and you can use the room next to this one if you want to stay during the week." Rosalie hesitated. "I need to talk to my mother first." "Of course, let me know what you decide." That night Rosalie talked to Alice. Her mother was initially worried, but seeing the determination in her daughter's eyes, she eventually agreed. "If that's what you want to do, my dear. But be careful, don't get too attached. He's not your son." The words echoed in Rosalie's mind as she packed a small bag with her clothes. "He's not your son." She knew that. She knew she was only helping temporarily. But when she held David that afternoon, when she felt his weight in her arms, when she saw those trusting little eyes looking at her, something inside her awakened, something that had been dormant since she lost her baby. Hope. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could still be useful, still make a difference, still love and be loved, even if temporarily. In the following days, a routine was established. Rosalie spent her mornings cleaning the house, but always with an ear attuned to David's room. When the baby woke up, she went upstairs and took care of him. She changed diapers, gave him bottles, rocked him, sang songs her mother used to sing to her when she was a child, and David responded. He cried less, he smiled more, he started gaining weight. Caleb observed everything with a mixture of relief and perplexity. He continued to look for a professional nanny, but none of the candidates the agency sent seemed suitable. And secretly, he began to question if he really needed someone else when Rosalie was doing such a good job. But there was something that bothered him. David was clearly getting attached to Rosalie. He cried when she left the room, calmed down instantly when she returned. It was as if he had found something essential in her, something that went beyond basic care. One afternoon, Caleb decided to talk to Rosalie. He found her in the garden, sitting on a bench under the jabuticaba tree, with David in her lap. The baby was awake, looking fascinated at the leaves swaying in the wind. "May I sit down?" Caleb asked. Rosalie nodded, making space on the bench. Caleb sat down, maintaining a respectful distance. "I want to thank you for what you've been doing," he began. "David is completely different since you started taking care of him." "I'm happy to help," Rosalie replied, her eyes fixed on the baby. Caleb hesitated before asking the next question. "May I ask you something personal?" Rosalie looked at him, cautious. "You may." "Do you have children?" The question hit Rosalie like a punch to the stomach. She felt tears burn, but fought to keep them under control. "I did," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "But he didn't survive." Caleb immediately felt guilty. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked." "It's okay," Rosalie said, though it clearly wasn't. It was 3 months ago he was stillborn. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with shared pain. 2 strangers united by loss, one who had lost his wife, another who had lost her son. "I'm so sorry," Caleb said finally. "I can't imagine how difficult that must be." Rosalie looked at David, who was now playing with her fingers. "It is difficult, but taking care of him helps. It makes me feel like I can still do some good." Caleb nodded, beginning to understand. Rosalie wasn't just taking care of David, she was healing herself too. And David, somehow, felt it. He felt that she understood his pain, his loss, in a way no one else could. "You can stay as long as you want," Caleb said. "I won't look for another nanny anymore. If you want the job, it's yours." Rosalie looked at him, surprised. "Are you sure?" "I am. You're the only person who has managed to reach him. I don't know how, but you have something he needs." If Caleb knew how true those words were, if he knew that what Rosalie had was exactly what David needed, literally, but she hadn't crossed that line yet. She still fought against the impulse that grew every day, every time she held the baby, every time she felt her breasts sore from so much accumulated milk. But the line would be crossed, soon, because some needs are stronger than reason, stronger than social rules, stronger than the fear of judgment. And when Rosalie finally yielded to that impulse, when she finally offered David what her body produced and her heart longed to give, everything would change, forever. But for now, on that quiet afternoon under the jabuticaba tree, with the baby calm in her lap and the father by her side, Rosalie allowed herself a moment of peace, a moment of hope, a moment to believe that, maybe, just maybe, she could rebuild her life from the broken pieces. And Caleb, looking at that scene, felt for the first time since Marianne's death that perhaps there was light at the end of the tunnel, that perhaps his son could be happy, that perhaps he himself could find peace. They didn't yet know that the journey would be much more complicated than they imagined, that there would be judgments, accusations, scandals, that they would have to fight against society, against family, against their own doubts. But they also didn't know that in the end love would win. Not romantic love, not necessarily, but love in its purest form, the love that heals, the love that transforms, the love that is born of shared pain and strengthens in adversity. This love was just beginning to blossom, and when it blossomed completely, it would be impossible to ignore, impossible to deny, impossible to destroy, because true love, the one that is born from the deepest need of the soul, is the most powerful force in the universe, and not all the judgments in the world can extinguish it. The following weeks brought a visible transformation in the Anderson mansion. The silence, previously constantly interrupted by David's desperate crying, was now punctuated by very different sounds. The baby's giggles, joyful babbling, the soft sound of Rosalie humming lullabies as she walked through the corridors with David in her arms. Caleb observed these changes with a mixture of relief and something else he couldn't name. He was sleeping through the night again, could concentrate on work meetings, and had resumed his morning exercise routine. Life seemed to be getting back on track, but there was a growing uneasiness within him, a feeling that something important was happening right under his nose, something he couldn't identify. David was unrecognizable. The thin, tense baby who cried non-stop was now a chubby, smiling child. His cheeks were rosy, his eyes bright, his movements more coordinated. The pediatrician, Dr. Henry, had been impressed at the last checkup. "I don't know what you're doing, Caleb, but keep it up. This baby is perfect." Caleb didn't know exactly what was being done. He only knew that Rosalie had a special gift with David. Whenever the baby became restless, she would appear, and as if by magic he would calm down. It was as if there was an invisible connection between them, something that transcended logic. What Caleb didn't know was that this connection was much more literal than he imagined. It had all started 2 weeks after Rosalie took over David's care. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Caleb had needed to go to the office to deal with an emergency. Mrs. Lucy had the day off. Rosalie was alone in the mansion with the baby. David woke up from his afternoon nap hungry. Rosalie prepared the bottle as she always did, but the baby rejected it. He cried, turned his face away, spat out the nipple. Rosalie tried everything. She checked the milk temperature, changed the bottle nipple, tried different positions. Nothing worked. The crying intensified, and Rosalie felt panic grow. David hadn't cried like this in weeks. Was he sick? Should she call Caleb? The doctor? That's when she felt it. The familiar pain in her breasts, the weight of accumulated milk. Her body continued to produce, even after 3 months. Doctors had said it was rare, but possible. Some women continued lactating for months, even years after losing a baby. It was nature's cruelty, a constant reminder of what had been lost. But at that moment, looking at David crying desperately, rejecting the bottle, Rosalie had a thought that both frightened and attracted her. What if? What if this was what he needed? What if her body was producing milk not out of cruelty, but for a purpose? No, she thought, pushing the idea away. It would be wrong. It would be crossing all boundaries. She was just the nanny. She had no right. But David continued to cry, and her heart couldn't bear to see it. Without thinking much, acting purely on instinct, Rosalie sat in the room's armchair, opened her blouse, and brought the baby to her breast. David stopped crying instantly. His tiny eyes widened as if he recognized something essential, and then, with a veracity that surprised Rosalie, he began to nurse. Tears streamed down Rosalie's face as she felt the baby suckle. It was pain and relief at the same time. Pain for the loss of the son who would never nurse. Relief for finally being able to offer what her body had been producing for months without purpose. And something more. Something deep and primitive. The feeling of being complete, of fulfilling a role for which she had been biologically designed. David nursed for long minutes, his tiny eyes beginning to droop with sleep. When he finally released the nipple, he was satisfied and sleepy. Rosalie placed him in the crib, adjusted her blouse with trembling hands, and sat back in the armchair, processing what she had just done. She had crossed a line. She knew it. But she couldn't regret it, because for the first time in months, she felt useful. She felt that her pain had a purpose, that the loss of her son, however devastating, might have a greater meaning. In the following days, Rosalie battled guilt and doubt. She knew she should tell Caleb. She knew she was hiding something fundamental. But how to explain? How to say that she was breastfeeding his son without permission? He would be furious. He would fire her, perhaps even take legal action. But David kept needing. He rejected the bottle more and more, accepting only Rosalie's breast. And she couldn't deny him. She began to develop a secret routine. When Caleb was at work, she breastfed David at home. When he was present, she waited until he left or locked herself in the room with the excuse that the baby needed a quiet environment to sleep. Mrs. Lucy began to suspect. She noticed that Rosalie spent a lot of time locked in the room with David. She noticed that the baby rejected bottles when Rosalie wasn't around. But she said nothing. She had her own suspicions, but preferred to remain silent. After all, the baby was clearly doing well, better than ever. But secrets have a life of their own, and this secret was about to be revealed in the worst possible way. Mrs. Eleanor had become a frequent visitor to the mansion. She always came unannounced, with the excuse of wanting to see her grandson, but Caleb knew she was really checking if everything was under control. The family's reputation was still her biggest concern. One Thursday afternoon, Eleanor arrived when Caleb was in a virtual meeting in his office. Mrs. Lucy greeted her and informed her that Mr. Anderson was busy. Eleanor decided to wait, and in the meantime went upstairs to see David. That's when she heard it. Sounds coming from the baby's room. Not crying, but something different. She approached the door, which was ajar, and peeked in. What she saw paralyzed her. Rosalie was sitting in the nursing armchair with David in her lap. Her blouse was open, and the baby was nursing at her breast. Eleanor felt her blood boil. She retreated silently, went downstairs and waited in the living room, her mind working quickly. She needed proof. She couldn't just accuse without concrete evidence. Caleb might not believe her, might think she was exaggerating. In the following days, Eleanor discreetly hired a private investigator, a professional, discreet woman specialized in delicate cases. She gave her clear instructions. Follow Rosalie. Document everything. The investigator did her job efficiently. She followed Rosalie. On one of her days off, when she left the mansion with David, saying she was taking him for some fresh air in the park. The investigator followed her to Bellevue Park, where Rosalie sat on a secluded bench away from curious eyes. The photos were taken, videos recorded. Rosalie breastfeeding David, the baby clearly satisfied, she with an expression of peace on her face. Irrefutable evidence. Eleanor received the material and felt a mixture of satisfaction and indignation. Satisfaction for having her suspicions confirmed, indignation for what she considered an absurd violation. How dared that woman? How dared she assume a role that was not hers? She scheduled a meeting with Caleb. She said it was urgent, that they needed to talk privately. Caleb, accustomed to his mother's exaggerated concerns, almost cancelled. But something in Eleanor's tone made him agree. They met in Caleb's office at the headquarters of the clinic chain. Eleanor arrived with a folder of documents and a grave expression. Caleb greeted her with a tired sigh. "What is it now, Mum?" Eleanor placed the folder on the table. "Open it." Caleb opened it. Inside he found photos. Dozens of them. Rosalie in the park with David in her lap. Rosalie breastfeeding. Close-ups that left no doubt about what was happening. Caleb felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. He looked at the photos, then at his mother, then back at the photos. He couldn't process what he was seeing. "What is this?" he asked, his voice sounding strange. "It's exactly what it looks like," Eleanor replied, her voice cold. "That woman is breastfeeding your son without your permission, for weeks, from what the investigator could gather." Caleb felt anger rise, hot and intense. How dared she? How dared she hide something so fundamental? He had trusted her. He had left his son in her care, and she had betrayed him in the worst possible way. "You need to fire her immediately," Eleanor continued, "and consider legal action. This is a serious violation. Who knows what else she's doing? Who knows what her true intentions are?" Caleb didn't answer. He picked up the photos and put them back in the folder. "I'll deal with this," he said, his voice controlled but tense. "Caleb, you need to understand the gravity," Eleanor insisted. "This woman has created an unhealthy dependency in the baby. David probably doesn't even accept bottles anymore. She manipulated him. She manipulated you. Who knows what she wants? Money? Position? To marry you and secure her future?" Eleanor's words echoed Caleb's worst suspicions. But something didn't fit. Rosalie had never asked for anything, never hinted at romantic interest, never shown ambition beyond doing her job well. "I'll talk to her," Caleb said finally. "Tonight." Eleanor didn't seem satisfied, but she nodded. "Do what's right, Caleb, for the family, for the baby." When Caleb arrived home that night, he found Rosalie in the garden with David. The baby was in her lap, playing, with her hair laughing. It was such a peaceful, natural scene that for a moment Caleb hesitated, but then he remembered the photos, the betrayal, and the anger returned. "Rosalie, we need to talk," he said, his voice cold. Rosalie looked at him and immediately realized something was wrong. Caleb's face was closed, his eyes hard. "Of course, Mr. Anderson. Let's go to the office. Mrs. Lucy can stay with David." In the office, Caleb closed the door and placed the folder on the table. He opened it and spread out the photos. Rosalie looked at them and felt the world collapse. She turned pale, her hands trembling. "Do you want to explain this to me?" Caleb asked, his voice dangerously calm. Rosalie tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. Tears began to fall silently. "How could you?" Caleb continued, his voice rising. "How could you hide something like this from me? You were breastfeeding my son without my permission, without my knowledge. You created a dependency in him. You manipulated the situation." "It wasn't like that," Rosalie finally managed to say, her voice broken. "I didn't manipulate anything, I just wanted to help." "Help?" Caleb almost shouted. "You call this helping? Hiding something so fundamental? You had an obligation to tell me, you had an obligation to ask for permission." "I know," Rosalie sobbed. "I know I should have told you. But I was afraid. Afraid you'd think it was strange, inappropriate, afraid of losing my job, afraid of being taken away from David." "And why did you do it?" Caleb asked. "What was your intention? What do you want?" Rosalie looked at him through her tears. "I don't want anything. I just wanted him to stop suffering. He rejected the bottle, he cried non-stop, and I had milk. My body kept producing after I lost my son. It seemed wrong to waste it when he needed it so much." Caleb felt his anger falter for a moment. He remembered the conversation they had weeks ago when Rosalie confessed to having lost a baby, but the betrayal still hurt. The feeling of having been deceived still burned. "You should have told me," he repeated, calmer now. "You should have given me the chance to decide." "I know," Rosalie agreed, wiping her tears. "I'm so sorry. I truly am." The silence that followed was heavy. Caleb looked at the photos again. Rosalie breastfeeding David. The baby clearly satisfied, healthy, happy, everything he wanted for his son, but obtained through lies. "I need you to leave," Caleb said finally. "I can't trust you after this." Rosalie felt as if she had been punched. "Please," she begged. "Please don't take him away from me. He needs me." "He needs someone honest," Caleb corrected. "Someone I can trust." "And you think you'll find someone who cares for him like I do?" Rosalie asked, the pain giving way to indignation. "Someone who loves him like I love him? How many nannies came through here before me? How many gave up? I stayed. I took care of him when no one else could. And yes, I hid something, but it was out of love. It was because I couldn't bear to see him suffer." The words hit Caleb hard, because they were true. Rosalie had stayed when all the others gave up. She had transformed David from a desperate baby into a happy child. And yes, she had hidden something fundamental. But were her intentions pure? "I need to think," Caleb said, running a hand over his face. "You can go, we'll talk. Tomorrow." Rosalie left the office with shaky legs. She went up to the room she occupied in the mansion and threw herself on the bed, sobbing. She had ruined everything. She had lost Caleb's trust. She would be taken away from David. And the baby? How would he react? Would he start crying non-stop again? Would he reject bottles again? Meanwhile, in the office, Caleb sat in his armchair looking at the photos. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions: anger, betrayal, but also understanding, gratitude, fear of what would happen if he sent Rosalie away. He picked up the phone and called Dr. Henry. He needed a medical opinion. He explained the situation, omitting names, presenting it as a hypothetical case. The doctor listened carefully. "Look, Caleb," Dr. Henry said, "from a medical point of view, there's nothing wrong with a woman breastfeeding a baby that isn't biologically hers. In fact, it's something that has happened for centuries. Wet nurses were common in the past. The important thing is that the woman is healthy, that the milk is safe. If the baby is doing well, gaining weight, developing normally, then there's no physical problem." "And emotionally?" Caleb asked. "That's more complicated. It can create a very strong bond between the child and the person who breastfeeds. But bonds aren't necessarily bad. Children can attach to several people. The important thing is that there's consistency, that the person is reliably present." Caleb thanked him and hung up. He sat there for hours thinking. When he finally went up to check on David, he found the baby sleeping peacefully in the crib. Rosalie wasn't in the room. She was probably in her own room crying. Caleb looked at his son and felt his heart ache. David was doing so well, so healthy, so happy, all thanks to Rosalie. But she had betrayed him, hidden something fundamental. Could he forgive her? Should he forgive her? The answer would come in the next few days, but it wouldn't be simple, because forgiveness never is, especially when it involves broken trust, revealed secrets and emotions so intense they seem impossible to process. And while Caleb struggled with his own emotions, Rosalie cried in her room, hugging her pillow, feeling that she had lost not just a job but a part of herself. The part that had been reborn when she started taking care of David. The part that had found purpose in pain. The part that had learned to love again after so much loss. And David, innocent of all the storm brewing around him, slept peacefully, unaware that his life was about to change again, unaware that the love that sustained him was being questioned, judged, put to the test. But true love always survives, always finds a way, even when all seems lost, even when trust is broken, even when the whole world conspires against it. Love always finds a way. The morning arrived heavy, laden with tension. Rosalie woke with eyes swollen from crying, her body aching as if she had been beaten. She hadn't managed more than a few hours of sleep, tormented by nightmares, where David cried and she couldn't reach him. She slowly got up, washed her face with cold water, and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back seemed to have aged 10 years in one night. She went down to the kitchen, where she found Mrs. Lucy preparing breakfast. The housekeeper looked at her with a mixture of pity and concern. "I heard what happened," she said softly. "Mr. Anderson told me." Rosalie nodded, unable to speak. She sat at the table but didn't touch the food Mrs. Lucy placed in front of her. "How was David?" "He woke up a little while ago. He's in his crib. He hasn't cried yet, but he'll need to feed soon." The words hit Rosalie like a knife. Feed. Something she could no longer do. Something that would be taken from her, like everything else she loved. Caleb came down shortly after, dressed for work, but with deep dark circles under his eyes. He clearly hadn't slept well either. He looked at Rosalie, who immediately stood up, her hands nervous. "Mr. Anderson, Sit down," Caleb interrupted, his voice tired but not hostile. "We need to talk." Rosalie sat down again. Caleb poured himself some coffee and sat opposite her. Mrs. Lucy discreetly left the kitchen, giving them privacy. "I spent the night thinking," Caleb began. "I spoke with David's pediatrician, presented the situation as a hypothetical case. He told me that, from a medical point of view, there's no problem with you breastfeeding David, provided you are healthy, which I presume you are." Rosalie nodded quickly. "I am. I had all my prenatal exams. Everything was fine." Caleb continued. "But the problem isn't medical, it's about trust. You hid something fundamental from me. You made a decision that affects my son without my permission. That is unacceptable." "I know," Rosalie said, her voice trembling. "And I'm sorry more than I can express." "Why didn't you tell me?" Caleb asked, and there was genuine confusion in his voice. "Why did you hide it?" Rosalie took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. "Because I was afraid you'd think it was strange, inappropriate, afraid you'd send me away, and I didn't want to be separated from David. He needed me and I needed him. After I lost my son, I was empty, dead inside. But when I started taking care of David, when I saw that I could help him, I felt I had a purpose again. And when he rejected the bottle and I realized I could offer what my body produced, it felt right. It felt like that's why everything had happened. So I could be here, at this moment, for him." Tears streamed freely down Rosalie's face now, but she didn't wipe them away. She continued speaking, the words coming out, in a desperate flow. "I know it was wrong to hide it. I know I should have told you, but I was so afraid of losing this, of losing him. Because he saved me, Mr. Anderson. David saved me from a dark place where I was sinking, and I wanted to save him too. I wanted him to be happy, healthy, loved. And if for that I needed to give everything of myself, I would, without asking for anything in return. Caleb listened in silence, observing the woman in front of him. He saw the genuine pain in her eyes, the sincerity in every word, and something inside him began to give way, because he understood. He understood the pain of loss. He understood the desperation of wanting to save someone you love. He understood the need to find purpose in the midst of chaos. "I don't want your money," Rosalie continued. "I don't want your position. I want nothing more than to be able to continue caring for David. If you want, you can pay me less. You can make me sign any document. You can put cameras in every room. I don't care, just don't take him away from me. Please." The silence that followed was long. Caleb took a sip of coffee, his eyes fixed on the cup. Finally, he looked at Rosalie. "I'm going to arrange for you to have some tests," he said. "I want to be sure you are healthy, that there's no risk to David. If everything is fine, you can continue, but with conditions." Rosalie felt a wave of relief so intense she almost fainted. "Any condition, whatever you want." "First condition. No more secrets. Anything related to David, you tell me, immediately. Second condition. You will live here permanently. I don't want David to be without you for days on end. Third condition. We're going to make this official. I'll register you as a wet nurse. I'll increase your salary appropriately, and we'll have everything documented. Fourth condition. You will have regular medical follow-ups, blood tests, consultations, everything necessary to ensure you are healthy." Rosalie nodded vigorously for each condition. "I agree to everything. Thank you. Thank you very much." Caleb raised his hand. "I'm not finished yet. Fifth condition. You need to understand that David is my son, not yours. You are caring for him. You are nurturing him, but he is not yours. I don't want there to be any confusion about that." The words hurt, but Rosalie understood. "I know. I always knew." "Good," Caleb said, standing up. "I'll schedule the tests for today. In the meantime, you can continue taking care of David as usual. But Rosalie," he looked at her intensely, "if you break my trust again, there will be no second chance. Is that clear?" "It is," Rosalie replied, also standing up. "I won't disappoint you, Mr. Anderson." Caleb nodded and left. Rosalie stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. He hadn't sent her away. He would let her continue caring for David. There was hope. She ran upstairs to the baby's room. David was awake in his crib, starting to get restless. When he saw Rosalie, his tiny eyes lit up and he extended his arms. Rosalie picked him up, feeling the tears return, but now they were tears of relief. "It's okay, little one," she murmured, sitting in the armchair. "Mama's here." She immediately corrected herself, her heart tightening. "Rosalie's here." But as David nursed, nestled against her chest, Rosalie couldn't deny what she felt. Maternal love. Deep, unconditional, overwhelming. She knew David wasn't her biological son. She knew he never would be. But her heart didn't understand that logic. To her heart, that baby was hers. As much hers as the son she had lost. The following days brought significant changes. Rosalie underwent a complete battery of tests. Blood, urine, even a test for transmissible diseases. Everything came back negative. She was perfectly healthy. The doctor who examined her, Dr. Henry, spoke with her at length about the situation. "It's uncommon these days," he said, "but it's not wrong. In ancient times, wet nurses were common, women who had lost babies or who had excess milk breastfed others' children. It's an act of generosity, actually, and breast milk is infinitely better for the baby than any formula." Rosalie felt validated by those words. She wasn't an aberration. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was just nourishing a child who needed it. Caleb, upon receiving the test results, felt more at ease. He spoke with his lawyer about how to formalize the situation. The lawyer suggested a detailed contract, specifying Rosalie's responsibilities, her salary, and making it clear that she was an employee with no parental rights over David. Rosalie signed everything without hesitation. She didn't want rights. She just wanted to be close to David. But not everything was resolved. Mrs. Eleanor, upon learning that Caleb had decided to keep Rosalie, was furious. She scheduled an urgent meeting with her son, this time at her own home. a luxurious apartment in the Mayfair neighborhood. "Have you gone mad?" she practically screamed when Caleb arrived. "You're allowing a stranger, a maid, to breastfeed your son. What will people say?" "I don't care what people will say," Caleb replied, tired. "I care about David's well-being, and he's doing better than ever." "This isn't natural," Eleanor insisted. "It's not right. This woman is creating an unhealthy dependency in the baby, and in you too, apparently." Caleb felt irritation grow. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about you getting attached to her. You're letting her take on a role that isn't hers, and when she decides to leave, when she finds another job, another man, what will happen to David?" "She's not going anywhere," Caleb said. "We have a contract." "Contracts can be broken," Eleanor retorted. "Caleb, you need to think about the future. David needs a real mother, a suitable woman from our social class who can give him not only nourishment but also education, connections, an appropriate future." "David is 4 months old, Mom. He's not concerned with social connections." "But you should be," Eleanor said, her voice becoming softer, more manipulative. "Caleb, you're young, successful, attractive. You could find a wonderful woman, marry again, give David a complete family. But not while this maid is occupying a space that isn't hers." Caleb stood up, clearly ending the conversation. "Rosalie isn't occupying any space. She's doing her job, and doing it very well. This conversation is over." Eleanor watched. Her son leave, frustration and concern mixed on her face. She knew she was losing control of the situation, and that was unacceptable. In the following days, Eleanor began a subtle but effective campaign. She started spreading the story among her social circle friends. Of course, she presented it in a distorted way. She said that Caleb was being manipulated by an ambitious maid who was using the baby to secure her future. She said that the woman had created an unhealthy dependency in the child. She said it was a scandal, a disgrace for the Anderson family. The rumors spread quickly. At dinners, tea parties, charity events, Caleb's name was whispered, with a mixture of pity and judgment. "Poor thing," they said. "He lost his wife, and now he's being taken advantage of by a gold digger." Caleb began to notice the changes. Strange glances at social events, conversations that stopped abruptly when he approached, invitations that stopped coming. At first, he ignored it, but when one of the investors in the clinic chain called him for a private conversation, expressing concern about his personal life affecting the company's image, Caleb realized that the situation was getting out of control. He confronted his mother on an unexpected visit to her apartment. "I know what you're doing," he said, his voice cold. "You're spreading rumors, tarnishing Rosalie's reputation." Eleanor didn't deny it. "I'm telling the truth. This woman is not appropriate to care for your son, and people agree with me." "People don't know the situation," Caleb retorted. "They don't know what Rosalie did for David. They haven't seen how he was before and how he is now." "And do you think they care?" Eleanor asked. "Caleb, you live in a world where appearances matter, where reputation is everything. You can ignore it, but you can't escape the consequences." Caleb left his mother's apartment feeling exhausted. He knew she was partly right. He lived in a world where judgments mattered, where public opinion could affect business, relationships, opportunities. But he also knew he couldn't simply discard Rosalie to please society, not when David depended so much on her. He arrived home and found Rosalie in the garden with David. The baby was lying on a blanket, playing with a colorful mobile that Rosalie held over him. She sang a soft song and David laughed, his tiny eyes shining with joy. Caleb stopped and observed the scene. There was so much peace there, so much love. How could this be wrong? How could something that brought so much happiness to his son be a source of shame? Rosalie noticed his presence and looked up. "Mr. Anderson, I didn't hear you come in." Caleb approached and sat on the blanket beside them. "How is he?" "Great. He fed an hour ago and is in good spirits. I think he's going to start rolling soon. He's almost getting there." Caleb watched his son, his heart aching with love and pride. "Rosalie," he said softly, "I want you to know that I trust you, regardless of what anyone says." Rosalie looked at him surprised. "Thank you. That means a lot." "But I need you to understand," Caleb continued, "that things can get difficult. People are talking, judging. There may be pressure for me to dismiss you." Rosalie felt fear clench her chest. "And will you?" "No," Caleb said firmly. "I won't. But I need you to be prepared. There may be comments, glances, even confrontations. My mother won't give up easily." "I can handle it," Rosalie said, her voice firm despite the fear. "I've been through worse. I can deal with gossip." Caleb nodded, admiring her strength. "Then we'll face this together." The words hung in the air, laden with meaning. Together. It was no longer just an employer-employee relationship. It was becoming something more. A partnership. An alliance. Two people united by their love for a child, willing to face the world's judgment to protect her. But neither of them was prepared for how intense that judgment would be, nor for the impossible choices they would have to make, nor for the revelations that were yet to come, because the story was just beginning. And the worst and the best was yet to come. That night, as Rosalie put David to sleep, softly singing a lullaby, she made a silent promise. No matter what happened, no matter who tried to separate them, she would fight. She would fight for that baby, who had become her reason for living. She would fight for the right to love him, to nurture him, to be present in his life. And Caleb, in his office, looking at photos of Marianne he still kept in his drawer, made his own promise. He would protect his son above all else. And if that meant defying society, defying his own mother, defying all expectations, then so be it. Because in the end, what mattered was not what people thought. It was what was right. And keeping Rosalie in David's life, however unconventional, was the right thing to do. But society rarely accepts what is different, and the battle that was approaching would test not only Caleb and Rosalie's determination, but also the very nature of love, family, and what it means to do what's right when everyone says you're wrong. The following weeks brought a growing tension that hung over the mansion like a dark cloud. On the surface, everything seemed calm. David continued to flourish under Rosalie's care, gaining weight, reaching developmental milestones, filling the house with his laughter. But beneath this surface of normalcy, invisible forces worked to destroy the fragile balance they had built. Mrs. Eleanor had not given up. On the contrary, she had intensified her efforts. If she couldn't convince her son directly, she would use other means. She began to organize dinners at her house, carefully inviting single women from Brighton's high society. Elegant, educated women with impressive resumes and influential families. She always found an excuse for Caleb to attend, always arranged for him to sit next to one of these carefully selected candidates. Caleb noticed his mother's game, but he attended anyway, more out of family obligation than real interest. He conversed politely with the women, but his heart wasn't there. His mind always returned home to David, to the peaceful routine he had built with Rosalie. It was at one of these dinners that he met Helen Drummond. She was 32, a corporate law attorney, came from a traditional Brighton family, and had that natural elegance that comes from generations of privilege. She was beautiful, intelligent, articulate, exactly the kind of woman Mrs. Eleanor would approve of. Helen was seated next to Caleb during dinner, and the conversation flowed surprisingly well. She was interesting, had strong opinions on politics and economics, and shared some of Caleb's concerns about the healthcare system in the UK. She wasn't superficial like many of the other women Eleanor had tried to introduce. At the end of the evening, Helen asked for Caleb's card. "I have some clients who might be interested in investing in private clinics," she said with a smile. "Perhaps we could schedule a lunch to discuss." Caleb handed her the card, seeing only a business opportunity, but Eleanor saw much more. She saw a possibility, a way to finally bring her son back to the path she considered appropriate. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Rosalie began to feel the weight of the situation in ways she didn't expect. The other employees, who had previously treated her with cordiality, now kept their distance. Mrs. Lucy remained kind, but even she seemed uncomfortable at times, as if she didn't quite know how to relate to Rosalie now that her role had changed so drastically. Even worse were the occasional visits from Caleb's acquaintances. Rosalie had learned to recognize the looks, curiosity, judgment, barely disguised contempt. When she appeared with David in her arms, conversations stopped. People looked, evaluated, drew conclusions. One afternoon, while taking David for a walk in the park, Rosalie encountered a group of mothers with their babies. She approached, hoping perhaps to make friends, to find other people who understood the challenges of caring for a small child. But when she introduced herself, when she mentioned that she cared for David, she saw their expressions change. "Oh, you're the nanny," one of the women said, her tone making it clear that Rosalie was not welcome in that circle. Rosalie felt her face flush. "I'm his wet nurse, actually." The silence that followed was awkward. The women exchanged glances, some raising their eyebrows. One of them, bolder, asked, "Wet nurse, does that still exist?" "It does," Rosalie replied, trying to keep her voice firm, "and it's very beneficial for the baby." "But you're not his mother, are you?" another woman asked, her tone almost accusatory. "No, his mother passed away during childbirth." "Oh, how sad," the first woman said, but without real empathy in her voice. "Well, I hope his father finds a new wife soon. Every child needs a real mother." The words hit Rosalie like a slap. She murmured an excuse and left, feeling tears burn. A real mother. As if what she did wasn't real. As if the love she felt didn't count. When she arrived home, she found Caleb in the office. He immediately noticed that something was wrong. "What happened?" Rosalie hesitated, but then decided to be honest. She remembered her promise not to hide anything. "I went to the park with David. I met some mothers. They made it clear I wasn't welcome." Caleb felt anger rise. "What did they say?" "That David needs a real mother. That you should find a new wife." Caleb ran a hand over his face, frustrated. "I'm sorry. People can be cruel when they don't understand a situation." Rosalie nodded, but the words continued to sting. "Mr. Anderson, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "Have you ever thought about it? About marrying again? About giving David a mother?" The question caught Caleb by surprise. He looked at Rosalie, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes, the fear of what the answer might be. "Honestly? No. I'm not ready to think about another relationship yet. Marianne passed away only 6 months ago. And besides," he hesitated, "David already has someone who cares for him with love. I don't see any need to change that." "But what if you meet someone?" Rosalie insisted. "What if that person doesn't accept me staying here?" Caleb looked at her intently. "Then that person wouldn't be suitable for me. Rosalie, you're part of David's life now. Anyone who comes into my life will have to accept that." The words brought relief, but also a pang of something more, something Rosalie didn't want to name, because she was beginning to realize that her feelings for Caleb were changing. It was no longer just respect or gratitude. Something deeper was growing, something dangerous. She pushed those thoughts away. She couldn't allow herself to feel that. Caleb was her employer. She was the employee. There was a clear line that could not be crossed. But lines, she would discover, sometimes become blurred, especially when two people spend so much time together, sharing the responsibility of caring for a child, living under the same roof, facing judgments together. A few days later, Helen called Caleb. They scheduled a lunch to discuss potential investments. Caleb accepted, seeing only a business opportunity, but when he arrived at the restaurant, he realized that Helen had other intentions besides business. She was stunning, dressed in an elegant suit that flattered her figure. They discussed investments for a few minutes, but then Helen changed the subject. "Your mother told me about your situation, about the baby, about the wet nurse. It must be difficult." Caleb immediately felt defensive. "My mother talks too much." Helen smiled. "She's worried about you. It's natural. Losing your wife so young, having to raise a child alone, it can't be easy." "I'm not alone," Caleb corrected. "I have help and we're doing fine." "I'm sure you are," Helen said softly. "But even so, it must be lonely. You're young, Caleb. You have a whole life ahead of you. You don't have to go through this alone." Caleb understood what she was getting at. He appreciated the subtlety, but he wasn't interested. "Helen, you're an incredible woman, but I'm not looking for a relationship right now." "I understand," Helen said, not looking discouraged. "But perhaps we could be friends? Go out once in. A while, no pressure. You need adults in your life, not just babies and employees." There was logic in what she said. Caleb really spent most of his time either working or at home with David and Rosalie. He had no social life. He didn't see friends. Maybe Helen was right. Maybe he needed more balance. "All right," he agreed. "Friends." Helen smiled, satisfied. "Great. There's an art exhibition at the Royal Arts Centre next week. Would you like to go with me?" Caleb hesitated, but then agreed. Why not? It was just an outing between friends. Nothing serious. But when? He told Rosalie that night, casually mentioning that he would be going out on Friday. He saw something pass through her eyes, something that looked like pain. But she merely nodded and said she would take care of David, as always. The week passed quickly. On Friday, Caleb dressed carefully, choosing an elegant suit. When he came downstairs, he found Rosalie in the living room with David. She looked at him, and for a moment their eyes met. "You look very nice, Mr. Anderson," she said softly. "Thank you. You have my number if you need anything." "We'll be fine. Have fun." But as Caleb left, Rosalie felt a tightness in her chest that she couldn't explain. Or perhaps she could, but didn't want to admit it. She was jealous. Jealous of the woman who would spend the evening with Caleb. Jealous of the possibility that he might be interested in someone. Jealous that she, Rosalie, might be replaced. She held David tighter, as if the baby could fill the void she felt. But he couldn't, because the void wasn't just about motherhood. It was about something more, something she had no right to feel. The exhibition was enjoyable. Helen was interesting company, knew a lot about art, made insightful comments about the works. They had dinner afterward at a sophisticated restaurant in Soho. The conversation flowed, and Caleb found himself genuinely laughing for the first time in months. When he took her home, Helen invited him up for coffee. Caleb hesitated. He knew what that invitation meant. He knew that if he went up, he would be opening a door he might not want to open. "Thank you, but I need to get back," he said. "David might wake up during the night." Helen nodded, hiding her disappointment. "Of course, another time then." Driving back home, Caleb thought about the evening. It had been pleasant. Helen was attractive, intelligent, interesting. Any man would be happy to be with her. So why did he feel so indifferent? Why did his mind keep returning home, to David, to Rosalie? When he arrived, the house was silent. He went upstairs to check on David and found the baby sleeping peacefully in his crib. Rosalie was in the armchair beside him, also sleeping, a book open on her lap. She must have fallen asleep while watching the baby. Caleb stood there watching. Rosalie looked so young when she slept, so vulnerable. Her hair had escaped her ponytail and fell over her face. Without thinking, Caleb reached out and gently brushed the strands away. Rosalie woke with the touch, her eyes opening confused for a moment before focusing on Caleb. "Mr. Anderson, I'm sorry, I must have dozed off." "It's all right, how was the night?" "Quiet. He fed at 8 and has been asleep ever since." Caleb nodded. "You should go to your room. Get some proper rest." Rosalie stood up, picking up the book. "How was the exhibition?" "It was good. Helen is pleasant company." Something passed over Rosalie's face, but it was too quick for Caleb to identify. "That's good. You deserve to go out, to have some fun." "Rosalie," Caleb called as she turned to leave. "Thank you for everything you do, not just for David, but for making this house a home again." Rosalie felt tears burn, but she held them back. "You're welcome. Good night, Mr. Anderson." "Good night, Rosalie." But as each went to their room, both knew that something had changed. An invisible line was being tested. Feelings that shouldn't exist were growing, and sooner or later they would have to face them. Because you cannot live under the same roof, share the responsibility of a child, face judgments together, without something developing, without hearts beginning to connect in ways that logic cannot explain. And when those feelings finally came to the surface, when they were finally recognized and named, everything would change again. For better or for worse, it remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. The story of Caleb, Rosalie, and David was far from over. In fact, the most intense chapters were yet to come. The most difficult challenges, the most impossible choices, the most shocking revelations. And at the center of it all, an innocent baby who asked for nothing but love, and two people who, each in their own way, were learning that love comes in many forms. That family is not just blood, that sometimes the deepest connections are born from the most improbable circumstances, and that when you find something real, something true, it's worth fighting for, no matter what the world says, no matter how many people judge, no matter how impossible it seems, because in the end, love always wins, always finds a way, always transforms, always heals. And that truth Caleb and Rosalie were about to discover was more powerful than any judgment, any prejudice, any obstacle the world could place in their path. The following months brought subtle but significant changes in the mansion's dynamic. David turned 6 months old, then 7, growing strong and healthy. He began to sit up alone, to babble sounds that almost seemed like words, to reach out his tiny arms to Rosalie whenever he saw her. The bond between them was undeniable, deep, impossible to ignore. Caleb observed everything with conflicting feelings. On one hand, he was happy to see his son doing so well. On the other, he began to realize that his own feelings for Rosalie were changing in ways he didn't expect. It was no longer just gratitude or respect. There was something more, something that made him look for excuses to spend time with her, that made his heart race when he saw her with David in her lap, that made him think of her at the most unexpected moments. Helen remained present in his life. They went out regularly, always as friends, although Caleb knew she hoped for more. She was patient, never pushed, but made it clear that she was available when he was ready. And Caleb appreciated her company, the normalcy she represented. But his heart wasn't there. It was on a Saturday afternoon, when Caleb decided to stay home instead of accepting Helen's invitation to a social event, that everything began to change. He found Rosalie in the garden, sitting on the grass with David. The baby was on his tummy, trying to reach a toy she had strategically placed just out of his reach, encouraging him to move. "May I join you?" Caleb asked. Rosalie looked up, surprised. "Of course, we're just playing." Caleb sat on the grass beside them, loosening his tie. David looked at his father and let out a squeal of delight, extending his tiny arms. Caleb picked him up, feeling his heart melt as it always did when he held his son. "He's growing so fast," Caleb said, marveling. "He is. He'll be crawling soon. We need to baby-proof the house better." "We'll do it together," Caleb said, and then realized the weight of the words. Together. As if they were a team. As if they were more than employer and employee. Rosalie also noticed. She looked at Caleb and their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. There was something in the air, a tension that was not uncomfortable, but intense, laden with unspoken possibilities. Caleb was the first to look away. "Rosalie, may I ask you something personal?" "You may." "Have you ever thought about having other children? In the future, I mean. When you meet someone?" Rosalie felt her heart tighten. The question touched on something painful. "I do, sometimes. But I'm afraid. Afraid of losing again. Afraid my body won't be able to. And besides," she hesitated, "I have David. Now I know he's not mine, but he fills that space in my heart." "He is yours," Caleb said softly. "Perhaps not biologically, but in every other sense. You are the only mother he knows." The words brought tears to Rosalie's eyes. "Thank you for saying that." "It's the truth," Caleb insisted. "And Rosalie, I want you to know that I am grateful, not just for what you do for David, but for who you are. You brought light back into this house, into our lives." Rosalie looked at him, and something passed between them, something they both felt, but neither dared to name, because naming it would make it real, and making it real would complicate everything. But complications, they would discover, are sometimes inevitable. That night, after putting David to sleep, Rosalie couldn't stop thinking about the conversation in the garden, about Caleb's words, about the way he had looked at her. Could it be possible that he felt something beyond gratitude? Or was he just being kind, acknowledging her work? She couldn't allow herself to hope. She couldn't allow herself to dream of something so out of reach. Caleb was a successful businessman from Brighton's high society. She was a cleaner from Snowbrook Dale. Their worlds didn't mix, not in that way. But the heart, she was learning, doesn't understand logic. It doesn't respect social barriers. It simply feels. Meanwhile, Mrs. Eleanor intensified her efforts. She organized a special dinner, inviting not only Helen but also her family. The Drummonds were one of Brighton's most traditional families, with political and business connections that could greatly benefit Caleb's businesses. The dinner was elegant, sophisticated. Helen was radiant, conversing animatedly with Caleb about a new bill that would affect private clinics. Her parents, Dr. Drummond and his wife Beatrice, were charming, making sure to praise Caleb's achievements. In the middle of dinner, Beatrice casually mentioned, "Helen told us about your baby. What a difficult situation, losing your wife so young. But I'm sure you'll find happiness again. A man like you shouldn't be alone." Caleb felt discomfort grow. He realized what was happening. They were practically arranging a marriage. And Helen, though she said nothing, looked at him with hope in her eyes. "I'm grateful for your concern," Caleb said politely, "but I'm fine. David and I have a good routine." "But a child needs a mother," Dr. Drummond said. "And you, my young man, need a companion. Someone who understands your world, who can be by your side at social events, who can help raise your son properly." The words echoed what so many people had said. But for the first time, Caleb felt not just discomfort but indignation. Who were they to say what David needed? Who were they to judge the way he chose to live his life? "With all due respect," Caleb said, his voice controlled but firm, "David has everything he needs. He has love, care, attention. And as for me, when and if I decide to be in a relationship with someone, it will be for love, not for social convenience." The silence that followed was awkward. Mrs. Eleanor looked at her son with a mixture of shock and anger. Helen lowered her eyes, clearly hurt. The Drummonds exchanged uncomfortable glances. Caleb stood up. "I apologize, but I need to go. Thank you for dinner." He left before anyone could protest. On the way home, he felt a clarity he hadn't had in months. He was tired of living according to others' expectations, tired of pretending he cared what society thought, tired of denying what he truly felt. And what he felt, he realized with a certainty that both frightened and freed him, was love. Not for Helen, not for any of the women his mother had tried to introduce, but for Rosalie, the woman who had saved his son, the woman who had brought light back into his life, the woman who, without realizing it, had captured his heart. When he arrived home, he found Rosalie in the living room, reading while she waited. She always waited awake when he went out, in case David needed anything. She looked up when he entered and immediately noticed that something was different. "Did something happen?" she asked, standing up. Caleb looked at her. Really looked. He saw not just the nanny, not just the wet nurse, but the woman. The strong woman who had survived the most devastating loss. The kind woman who cared for his son with unconditional love. The beautiful woman who made his heart beat faster. "Rosalie," he said, approaching her, "I need to tell you something." Rosalie felt her heart race. "What is it?" Caleb stopped in front of her, so close that he could feel the warmth of her body. "In the past few months, you've become essential in my life, not just as someone who cares for David, but as a person. I wake up thinking about you. I spend the day wanting to come home to see you, and when I'm with other people, all I can think about is how I'd rather be here with you." Rosalie could barely breathe. "Mr. Anderson, Caleb," he corrected. "Please, call me Caleb." "Caleb," Rosalie repeated, the name sounding strange but right on her tongue. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything now," Caleb said. "I just need you to know, to understand what I feel. I know it's complicated. I know there are differences between us. I know people will judge. But I don't care anymore. I only care about what's real. And this," he gestured between them, "is real." Rosalie felt tears stream down her face. "I feel it too," she confessed. "I tried not to feel it. I tried to convince myself it was just gratitude, just respect. But it's more. Much more." Caleb reached out and touched her face softly, wiping away her tears with his thumb. "Then let's not deny it anymore. Let's see where this takes us." And then, slowly giving her time to back away if she wished, Caleb leaned in and kissed Rosalie. It was a soft kiss, almost hesitant at first, but it quickly deepened, laden with months of repressed feelings, of denial, of desire. When they separated, both were breathless. Rosalie rested her forehead against Caleb's, her eyes closed. "What are we going to do?" "We'll face it together," Caleb replied. "Whatever comes, we face it together." But what would come would be more difficult than they imagined, because when Mrs. Eleanor found out, and she found out quickly through the gossip network she maintained, her reaction was explosive. She scheduled an urgent meeting with Caleb, this time bringing not only emotional arguments, but concrete threats. "If you insist on this ridiculous relationship, I will take action," she said, her voice cold. "I will question your ability to care for David. I will seek custody of my grandson." Caleb felt his blood run cold. "You wouldn't do that." "I would, and I will," Eleanor replied. "I have lawyers, I have influence. I can argue that you are under undue influence, that this woman manipulated you, that David is at risk. And believe me, I will find judges who will agree with me." It was a real threat. Caleb knew his mother had connections, resources. She could make his life a living hell. She could really try to take David from him. But looking at his mother, seeing the cold determination in her eyes, Caleb realized something. He realized that he couldn't live in fear. He couldn't let threats dictate his choices. He couldn't sacrifice his happiness and Rosalie's to appease society. "Do what you deem necessary, Mother," he said calmly, "but I will not give up on Rosalie. And I will not let you take David from me. I am a good father. David is healthy, happy, well cared for. No judge would take a child from such an environment." Eleanor realized she was losing. She changed tactics, her voice becoming softer, almost pleading. "Caleb, please, think about the family's reputation. Think about David's future. He will grow up being judged for your choices." "He will grow up seeing that love is more important than others' opinions," Caleb corrected. "He will grow up knowing that his father had the courage to follow his heart, and he will grow up loved by two people who would give everything for him. That is more valuable than any reputation." Eleanor realized she had lost. She stood up, her posture rigid. "You will regret this." "Perhaps," Caleb agreed, "but I will regret it more if I don't try." In the following days, the rumors exploded. The businessman Caleb Anderson was in a relationship with his maid, the wet nurse who cared for his son. It was a delicious scandal for Brighton's social circles. Some judged severely. Others found it romantic, but everyone talked. Caleb lost some contracts. Some investors pulled away, concerned about the image, but others remained and new ones appeared, people who admired his courage to defy conventions. Helen called one last time, not to reprimand, but to wish him happiness. "You're brave, Caleb. I hope you're happy." And he was. For the first time since Marianne's death, Caleb felt truly happy. It wasn't the same happiness. It was different, built on different foundations. But it was real. Rosalie also faced judgments. Her mother, Mrs. Alice, was initially worried. "Are you sure about what you're doing, my dear? This man is from another world." But when she met Caleb, when she saw how he looked at Rosalie, how he treated David, how genuine and respectful he was, Alice gave her blessing. "If you love each other, then fight for it." 6 months later, in a simple ceremony in the mansion's garden, under the jabuticaba tree that Marianne loved so much, Caleb and Rosalie got married. It wasn't a large wedding, just close friends, Mrs. Lucy, Mrs. Alice, some of Caleb's colleagues who supported him. Mrs. Eleanor did not attend but sent a letter. It wasn't a blessing, but it wasn't a curse either. It was an acknowledgement that whether she agreed or not, it was real. David, now 1 year old, was in Rosalie's arms during the ceremony. When the justice of the peace asked if they accepted each other, David gave a squeal of joy, as if giving his own approval. Everyone laughed and tears flowed freely. After the ceremony, as the guests celebrated, Caleb took Rosalie to a quiet corner of the garden. He held David, who was playing with his father's tie. "Thank you," Caleb said. "For what?" Rosalie asked, confused. "For saving my son, for saving me, for having the courage to love even when it seemed impossible." Rosalie smiled through her tears. "You saved me too. You gave me a family when I thought I'd never have one." They looked at David, who was now trying to reach Rosalie's face, babbling something that sounded almost like Mama. And although he wasn't biologically her son, although the journey to get there had been tortuous and painful, at that moment they were a family. Complete, real, true. The following years brought challenges, as all marriages do. There were moments of doubt, conflict, difficulty. Mrs. Eleanor eventually came around, not completely, but enough, to have a relationship with her grandson. Society continued to judge, but with less intensity as other scandals emerged. David grew strong and healthy, calling Rosalie Mama since he started speaking. When he was 5, he asked about the woman in the photos he saw around the house. Caleb and Rosalie together told him about Marianne, about how she had given her life so he could be born, about how she was loved and would always be remembered. "You had 2 mothers," Caleb explained. "One who gave you life and another who gave you love every day. Both loved you, more than anything." David, with the simple wisdom of children, nodded. "I'm lucky then." And he was, lucky to have survived, lucky to have found in Rosalie exactly what he needed, lucky to have a father who had the courage to defy the world for love. Years later, when David was already a teenager, Rosalie became pregnant. It was a difficult pregnancy, full of fear and anxiety because of the previous loss. But with Caleb's support, with careful medical monitoring, she gave birth to a healthy girl. They named her Marianne in honor of the woman who had made everything possible. And David, now 15, held his little sister with a tenderness that made Rosalie cry. "I'll take care of her," he promised, "just like you took care of me." That night, with both children asleep, Caleb and Rosalie sat in the garden under the stars. "Did you ever imagine," Caleb asked, "that we would get here when you first walked into this house as a cleaner?" Rosalie laughed softly. "Never. It seemed impossible." "But it wasn't," Caleb said, taking her hand. "Because love always finds a way, always." And it did. Through pain, through judgment, through all impossibilities, love found a way. It wove a family from broken pieces. It created beauty from suffering. It transformed loss into gain. Because that is the nature of true love. It knows no barriers. It respects no social rules. It doesn't care what should be. It simply is. Pure, powerful, transformative. And in the mansion in Bellevue Heights, under the jabuticaba trees laden with fruit, a family slept in peace. A family built not by blood, but by love. Not by convention, but by courage. Not by what was expected, but by what was right. And if the stars could speak, they would say that this is the most beautiful story of all. The story of how love wins, always, inevitably, magnificently, because in the end, that's all that matters. Not money, not social position, not others' opinions. Just love. The love that heals. The love that transforms. The love that saves. And Caleb, Rosalie, and David, each in their own way, had been saved. By love. And by love, they built something that no judgment could destroy. A family. A home. A life full of meaning and purpose. And they lived. Not happily ever after, because real life is not a fairy tale. But they lived with love, with courage, with the certainty that no matter what happened, they would face it together. And in the end, that's all any of us can hope for. Someone to love, someone who loves us back, and the courage to fight for that love, no matter what the world says. This is the story of Caleb, Rosalie, and David, a story of loss and gain, of pain and healing, of judgment and acceptance. But above all, a story of love. The kind of love that changes lives, that defies impossibilities, that proves that, in the end, the heart always knows the way. And that path, however winding it may be, is always worth taking.